Maybe Thanksgiving's real purpose isn't comfort, it's confrontation. A time to ask what freedom costs and who still waits for it. This is why I tell this story, because gratitude isn't forgetting, it's remembering who paid the price.
Imagine a candlelit cabin in the South, 1865. Newly freed families gather for their first Thanksgiving, not with lavish feasts, but with simple food grown by their own hands. In the hush, a voice begins to sing. Spirituals, songs born in bondage, rise softly, then swell. These were not just melodies, they were prayers and proclamations. Songs like Steal Away, Go Down Moses, and Swing Low, Sweet Chariot carried secret meanings, hope for deliverance, and the memory of struggle. In these early Thanksgivings, music was more than a tradition. It was a lifeline, a way to grieve, remember, and dream aloud. When freedom felt fragile, voices united in song made it real. Each chorus was an act of defiance, a reminder that their spirits could not be broken by laws or chains. From church pews to crowded cabins, music became both shield and sword. These songs filled the silence left by years of enforced quiet, echoing across fields and through generations. In every refrain, freed people gave thanks, not just for food or freedom, but for the power to raise their voices at last.
The year was 1865. The war had ended, but peace had not yet begun. Freedom was declared, but hunger still lingered. Across the South, newly freed men and women searched for the one thing they'd never owned before, a place to simply be. They built makeshift homes from abandoned lumber and turned broken tools into new beginnings. The first gardens sprouted behind freedmen's churches, collards, turnips, beans, and hope. On Sundays, they gathered under brush arbors and oak trees and sang not of victory, but of gratitude, because gratitude was the only thing they could afford in abundance. That first Thanksgiving after Emancipation was not about harvest, it was about survival. There were no feast tables polished with silver. There were wooden boards nailed together, covered with cloth scraps, and yet they held more holiness than any royal banquet. Families shared what they could, a pot of beans, cornbread, or the laughter of children who finally slept without fear. Elders told stories of those who didn't live to see the sunrise of freedom. They spoke their names, one by one, so that the wind would remember. In those moments, something sacred happened. They claimed a new kind of Thanksgiving, not for what they had, but for what they had survived. And as the seasons turned, those simple gatherings grew into traditions. Each dish on the table carried a story. Rice from the Carolinas, yams from the Delta, molasses from the islands. Every flavor whispered where they had been and who they had become. They were no longer property. They were people, builders, farmers, teachers, healers. Each bite was proof that freedom had taken root. So when we sit down today, we are not just eating food, we are tasting memory. The recipes of resistance, the flavor of faith, the first feast after freedom still feeds us. Freedom spread like rumor, carried by word of mouth, across cotton rows and down dirt roads. In those early months, churches rose faster than houses. Wherever 2 or 3 could gather, they did. They prayed, sang, and gave thanks, not for what they had, but for what they survived. They called it the brush arbor, a roof of branches, sunlight slipping through the leaves, and the sound of hope rising. Women stirred pots over open fires. Men shared stories from the war, how some fought with the Union, how others just ran until they were free. And when the food was ready, they passed it around like communion. Beans, biscuits, greens, molasses, corn. Each bite was a prayer. Each prayer was a promise. This was more than a meal. It was a declaration we are still here. They named the day not for Lincoln, not for the Union, but for themselves. Thanksgiving, they said, after freedom. And from that table, generation after generation, the taste of struggle became the taste of celebration. As the years turned, those small gatherings grew. What began beneath trees and brush arbors moved into wooden church halls and one-room schools. Every November, the same question echoed. What do we have to give thanks for this year? And the answers came, soft but certain, for the harvest, for the children, for another year of freedom. The food changed, but the spirit never did. A handful of cornmeal became golden cornbread. The greens from backyard gardens simmered slow with salt and smoke. What had once been scraps became recipes, and recipes became heritage. Mothers taught daughters, fathers taught sons how to season hope into every pot. They told stories while they stirred about the days when you could be punished for owning a spoon, and about the miracle of cooking for your own family. These were not just meals. They were lessons in survival, written in flavor, collard greens for endurance, sweet potatoes for comfort, black-eyed peas for luck, cornbread for memory. Each dish carried a scripture older than paper, the gospel of resilience. And when the feast was ready, they invited everyone, neighbors, travelers, teachers, soldiers passing through. The table stretched wider than the room. Because freedom, they said, only multiplies when it's shared. Over time, those gatherings moved north and west to Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles, wherever our people built new lives. Yet every kitchen still smelled like the South smoke, sugar, and prayer. What we now call soul food began there in those humble feasts after freedom. It was never about abundance. It was about remembrance. So when we bow our heads today, we aren't just blessing the food. We're blessing the journey, the hands that cooked, the hearts that endured, and the souls that turned suffering into celebration. Seasons kept turning. Freed people became farmers, teachers, and leaders. They sent their children to schools built beside the same fields where they once picked cotton. And every Thanksgiving, they remembered. They remembered the brush arbor and the firelight. They remembered the sound of chains replaced by the sound of laughter. They remembered that gratitude had once been an act of rebellion. Each generation added something new, a hymn, a dish, a prayer. And even when the world tried to forget, the stories stayed on the tongue and in the kitchen. The feast after freedom became more than a meal. It became a message that liberty means nothing if we cannot share it. Every time a family gathers now, whether in Alabama or Los Angeles, whether the table is polished wood or a paper plate on a folding chair, they are answering that same call. They are saying, we remember those who tilled with their bare hands. We remember those who were told they owned nothing yet created everything. We remember that freedom, like a meal, must be made fresh every day. So when you lift your fork or your voice or your prayer this year, remember this too. Thanksgiving did not begin in comfort, it began in courage. And the feast we still share is the proof that courage survives. When I tell these stories, I'm not just talking about the past, I'm talking about us, about what we carry and what we refuse to lose. They called it Thanksgiving after freedom, but maybe it was really freedom giving thanks. I'm Rondia Kaufer, and this story, like so many others, comes from chains to change. If it moved you, share it, because the more we tell these stories, the more freedom has to feast on